Welcome to Dollars and Cents, Creating Your Fulfilled Life with Nicole Romito from Private Vista. In this podcast, we draw from years of experience as well as guest specialists to help you create the life you imagine. Join us in this journey as we enlighten and empower you to align your lifestyle to help you achieve your goals with a clear picture of your future. Now, let's get to the show.
Hello and welcome to Dollars and Cents with your host, Nicole Romito. Nicole, it's so good to be back with you. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic today, Eric. How are you?
I am hungry. We've been talking before the podcast started about deep dish pizza again. This seems to be a theme. Yeah, so I'm hungry and I'd like to listen to you and your guest talk while I eat. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Just please mute yourself.
Okay. No chewing on the podcast. Is that what you're saying?
No chewing on the podcast.
Fantastic. Who do you have as a guest today?
Well, I'm super excited for my guest today. I've got one of my wonderful colleagues, Colleen Dwyer, with me, and we are going to talk about all things 529 plans.
Oh, that's a big topic. That's huge.
It is. It's a really big topic. And so we're going to do our best to do a high level to highlight some of the key things you should think about, understanding that a further deeper dive or conversation will most likely be needed.
Fantastic. I'm here to learn with the audience. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Colleen.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Nicole.
Great. Well, before we dive into the fun-filled topic of 529s, Colleen, will you please share with our listeners a little bit about your professional background?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I joined Private Vista about 5 years ago as an advisor. Before working with Private Vista and working as an advisor, I served as a consultant at Aon in the health and benefits space. I graduated from Notre Dame, actually was a pre-med major, which is a little bit of a diverse background for
I didn't know that
for
about
financial
you,
advisors, but so I have a great appreciation for all of the doctors out there. And I live in Lincoln Park, was married about a year ago, and love what I do. So excited to talk specifically about 529s today.
Well, that's great. And certainly your foray into pre-med certainly still lends itself, because I know we always say everyone should get their annual financial checkup. So
Exactly.
Maybe you could also tell me why my arm hurts when I bend it so much. So, all right. Well, with that, again, thanks for joining us. Why don't we go ahead and start with maybe an overview of what a 529, or some people call it a 529 plan is?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. I think one of the troubles of what we do is that a 529 is kind of everyday talk, but obviously we want to make sure that our listeners have a pretty basic understanding of what we're talking about. And really a 529 is a type of investment account that's designed specifically for education funding. So some of the structures and tax benefits allow parents or grandparents or friends to help save for, traditionally it was college education. It's become a little bit of a broader tool for, even pre-college expenses and trade schools and things like that, which we'll talk about. But the idea is you can put money into this account. It's an investment account, like I said. So as the money grows, the tax benefit is that it grows tax-free as long as it's used for qualified education purposes. So college tuition, room and board, books, study abroad expenses, you name it. Most things that you would associate with college are qualified. And like I said, it can also be used for trade school, things of that nature. So, it's a great tool. It's especially effective when you can start saving early. So that tax-free growth, obviously, the longer you have savings growing, that compounding effect is really powerful. And so when clients come to us and one of their goals would be to help support kids or grandkids with education, they often ask, what is the right tool to help accomplish this goal? And most often the 529 is the simple solution for that specific goal.
So a couple of follow-up questions. That was a great overview. Thank you. You mentioned that the earnings or growth are tax deferred. Is there any tax break for the money you deposit or contribute to the account?
Yeah, great question. So I was talking about once the money's in the account, the tax benefits. But there is also, depending on the state that you live in, a potential income tax break when you make contributions. A lot of our clients are based in Illinois, so I'll give that as an example.
Great.
In Illinois, each person, so if you're a single parent or a grandparent, or if you're a married couple, each person can contribute $10,000 that's deductible off of your Illinois income. So for a single person, $10,000, a married couple, $20,000 in any given tax year. And like I said, it's deductible off of Illinois income. So it's not a federal tax break, but it is an Illinois state tax deduction. Like I mentioned, 529s, one of the interesting things about them that we won't get into really on this call is that there are differences across states in terms of the plan options, the tax deductions that I just mentioned. So that's when it's important, when we sit down with clients, we know where they live, or, you would talk with an advisor about what makes sense specifically for your state, just because there are some complexities around that piece of things.
So question, I know we have clients who live all over the nation, and if maybe you just had a baby or your child's young and you really have no idea where they're going to go. So you just mentioned there's a lot, every state has their own plan. Does it matter like where I live, if I'm the parent, where the college is that my child will attend? Like, does that matter when you're doing the planning? Or does that, if I live, like you said, we're in Illinois, and I do the Illinois plan, could the child then, do they have to go to school in Illinois?
Yeah, good question. I think you bring up two different points. So the first is, if you live in Illinois, do you need to open a 529 account with the Illinois 529 plan? The answer to that is no. It's flexible where you can open 529 plans, but you obviously want to be strategic in terms of maximizing tax deduction. So in order to get the Illinois tax deduction, you need to be using an Illinois plan, for example.
Okay, that makes sense.
To answer your second question, which is a good one, and I think something people often have questions about, because there is a financial tool out there for state-specific college funding. So the 529, though, is not that tool. So a 529 is very flexible in terms of where the money can be used for college expenses or education. So even if you use an Illinois 529 plan, that does not lock you into, sending your kids to Northern Illinois or U of I.
Okay, great. So just to use you as an example, if your parents had opened a 529 in Illinois, since you're from here, we know you went to Notre Dame, they could still use their Illinois funds to pay for your Notre Dame education costs.
Exactly.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for clarifying.
Sure.
And then I do want to just close the loop that you shared on the Illinois tax benefits. At the federal level, you're contributing after tax dollars. Then when you're investing them, they're growing tax deferred. As long as they're taken, the withdrawal is for a qualified education expense, then everything comes out income tax free at the federal level.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay. So it's a tax-free growth of investments, so long as it's used for a qualified expense.
Okay.
I will, this is the other question that comes up a lot, right? Is, well, one, what if I don't use the money in the account? Or what if my kids get what if they're a D1 football star and, they don't need the money because they got a full ride? So while we're encouraging of all of our, clients' kids,
we're
to
supportive
reach
of
for their
everyone's
dreams.
child
Exactly.
genius or star athlete.
Exactly.
Right?
So it's possible. If it's still an important goal, this is something we'll talk about with the clients, right? It's weighing the possibilities and the probabilities. So, if there's a chance this could happen, but you still want the ability to pay for college if they somehow don't get the full ride athletic scholarship, the rules around the 529 also do accommodate for things like scholarship. So you can, let's give an example of your kid gets a scholarship to USC to play football. The tuition as a normal student would be $50,000 a year, but obviously they're getting that free and clear as a student athlete. And so you have the ability to withdraw up to the amount of the scholarship out of the account free of penalties. You do still owe income on the growth.
On any earnings or gains.
Correct. Okay. So, if you put 30,000 in as an investment, it grew to 50,000, you would get the money, the 50,000 out that your child was awarded in scholarships, but the 20,000 would be considered income to you in that year that you take the amount out. So still a good, you still got the growth. You just had to pay a little bit of taxes on it, which if you think about it, would be, somewhere similar to what maybe you would have owed if you had just a traditional investment like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. What about if, following with your example, the future USC star football player has a younger sibling? So there's additional brothers or sisters.
Yeah.
What options would the family have then?
Great question. So the way that a 529 account is structured is that, let's just say I'm a parent, I'm the owner of the account, and the account has a beneficiary designation. So you might have, your son, Johnny, is your beneficiary of the account that you fund, but you do have a second child. So if the first child ends up not using all of their funds, gets a scholarship, whatever, you could come up with a lot of different scenarios here. You can always change the beneficiary to another child. You can actually even change it to yourself. So, if you decide to go back to school. Could I go to
golf school maybe? You've seen my swing.
Yeah, right. We could spend a lot of time talking about the flexibilities of 529 plans. You can, we brought up the kind of multi-generation planning that we do. So if you have children that don't use it, we often have clients who actually will change the beneficiary designation to their grandchildren. And then the only thing that you might change if you do that is also the investment strategy right now that you're planning for a much younger generation. So these are, again, the areas that get a little, you can be strategic, and you just need to think about what your family dynamic is. And again, the possibilities and probabilities around the best way to use the accounts.
Absolutely. And I know one thing we often talk about is, the 529 plan is actually one of the few things that Congress got right, because there's really nice tax benefits and a lot of flexibility. So it is a tool that really should be at least considered and incorporated when you're looking at your overall financial plan.
Definitely. It's funny because, I brought up the scenario of when clients come in with this goal of education funding. And when a lot of other goals are brought to our attention, typically there's maybe a couple of viable paths we might want to pursue, and there's pros and cons. With education funding, this really is 99% of the time the way to go, if it's a kind of a traditional situation. So to your point, it makes a lot of sense. The tool's flexible. So there's a number of reasons that it works, as designed and really well for people with this objective for their kids.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned how there's an escape hatch, if you will, if your child does get a scholarship or, a full ride or things like that. What about, can you give us an overview of, does it impact financial aid? How is that considered?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is a complicated question for a couple of reasons, mostly because it's actually a changing rule. So currently there's a difference between who owns the 529 and how that impacts financial aid. So, if you have a grandparent owned 529 account, that has a different impact on how the financial aid package is calculated for a student than if it's a parent owned 529 account. That's one of the rules that's changing in 2024. So if that affects you, you'd want to talk to your advisor about what the new rules are and how to best plan around that. So, and then with the more traditional situation, which is parent-owned 529 accounts, it does have an impact, but it's pretty minor. So what we often say to clients is that the benefits of funding a 529, doing the savings early, getting that tax-free growth far outweighs the slight discount you might get on a financial aid package. So it's roughly 5% of the account value that can negatively impact
that would be
FAFSA.
Yeah, that would be counted as an asset that could potentially reduce aid.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's not, excluded, but it's not such a large component of the calculation where it would be, not worth funding a 529.
Right. Yeah. It's pretty minimal impact.
Correct.
When it does.
Correct. And it's becoming the changes in the rules is actually becoming more favorable for
Imagine
these
that.
grandparent 529s. Yeah, that's a little unusual. Typically it goes in the other direction,
Right.
but it'll become slightly simpler and then also, better for grandparents to be funding education accounts.
That's great. Well, we've talked a little bit about funding. You've talked about some of the tax benefits. Are there any limits? Like, could I just decide I want to fund, $100,000 to, my friend's child's 529 plan?
Yep. Great question. So, yes, there are limits.
Okay.
But again, there's been some rules created to try to increase flexibility specifically for education funding. So in general, with gifting,
Okay.
so this is including 529s, but also just in general, each person, the current limit is each person can give $16,000 a calendar year, tax year, to another person without needing to file any sort of reporting or gift tax returns.
Does it have to be related to them, or could I write a check to you for 16,000?
You can, and I encourage you to do that if you feel so
and you
inclined.
wouldn't say no?
Exactly. So, right, it's not a related issue. It's a person to person
Okay.
issue. And that's, again, a married couple. That's two separate people who can make two separate gifts, and they can make the gift to the same person. So in the case of a 529, the limit, if you're a single person, is, $16,000 a year. However, there is a rule that allows people to basically contribute 5 years of gifts. So 16,000 times 5 all at once to kind of do the contributions earlier. So,
Oh, interesting.
a lot of times we'll see this with grandparents, again, who are, later in life, have built up, their retirement assets to the point where they have some excess and want to help with college funding. So they, with just extra, assets on the side, they might decide to do the, each of them can give 16,000 times 5 all up front. And the real benefit to doing that, if you have the flexibility, is that you just get additional years of investment tax-free growth. So there is that benefit to doing it earlier if you have the flexibility to do it.
Absolutely. And I know we've talked to clients too, as part of an estate plan, 529s, whether it's for parents or the grandparents, as you just shared, because that's another level or layer of flexibility where even if you are the owner of the account, it's out of your taxable estate.
Exactly. So for clients that have a federally or a taxable estate at the state level and are trying to find ways that they're excited about lowering their estate, this might be a good choice, because to Nicole's point, it's a little bit unusual in that they maintain ownership of the account and some control in ways that, you could always change the beneficiary. You can control what you're willing to help with, et cetera, but it is outside of your estate. So it's another good estate planning technique if you're looking to minimize your taxable estate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think, or we find it definitely with our clients, that education is usually a core value they share. And we've seen a lot of our parents and grandparents who really enjoy being to help take that pressure off the next generation.
Exactly. Yep.
So great. Awesome. Well, why don't we talk a little bit about you've mentioned investing. So it makes sense if you have a newborn baby, you've got probably 18 years till you might be touching the funds if they're for post-high school expenses. So it sounds like, it's not going to be putting in like a money market or a CD. How does that work? I mean, can I buy crypto in my 529?
I've never seen crypto as an approved investment selection, but maybe, I shouldn't say never.
Never say never.
Never say never, but yep, exactly. So just like all investing, this is a conversation around what's your time horizon, what's your risk appetite, so when we consult with, you gave a good example, right? Young parents, they've got a 6-month-old.
Right.
And they're wanting to start contributing to a 529 account, we have a 18 to 22 year time horizon that we can work with from an investment perspective. And so we're much more comfortable recommending a more growth oriented portfolio. one thing that works well for a lot of clients, especially if you're looking for, if you don't want to be building portfolios yourself, they have what they call age-based models. You might be familiar with a similar concept within your 401ks at work, which are called target date funds.
Oh, yes. Or sometimes like a life cycle fund.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Exactly. So it's a similar concept. The difference here is that you're not timing your investments for retirement. You're timing them for college or, education funding. So go ahead.
Well, I didn't say right. So with the age-based, right, I know it's kind of a nice, like you're on a glide path. And so as the child gets older, closer to where you would potentially be making a withdrawal, then it becomes more conservative, correct?
Exactly. And the nice thing that for people who want to do this but don't want to spend a ton of time working on it, that glide path is happening organically. You don't need to go in every year and remember to change the allocation to be slightly, more conservative given the time horizon. So it's a simple solution, and it's a diversified portfolio within those age-based funds that are available on, most all of these 529 platforms.
That's great too. And I know, as we're sitting here together today in our studio, the markets they've been very volatile and they are still down year to date. So would you agree that would take some of the pressure off? Let's just say your child, you just had to write the first tuition check maybe within the last few weeks or so, right? So
yeah, exactly. So this is this statement's true, right? When you're an investor, not just education investing, but having a strategy like this, I think, is a little bit emotionally easier for people. That it's a long term, and it's the allocation that's set up based on your child's age is appropriate. So during a down market, right, if you have an 8-year-old, our recommendation would be
invest more.
Don't sell, stay the course. This was the plan. But you do bring up a good point. One of the restrictions, I would say, with age-based investing or these target date funds or whatever you want to call it, as you get closer to using the funds, the challenge that we've seen a couple of clients face, especially right now in a down market, is that if you need to draw from the portfolio, although these age-based funds are pretty conservative by the time that you need the money or your kids are starting college,
sure,
they still have some exposure to the market. And so when they go to sell from the age-based fund, you can't be selective around only selling from the, bond investments or maybe there's some money market or cash within the age-based fund.
Okay.
You have to sell across the whole fund. And so as you get closer to college, our recommendation is to actually veer away from these age-based funds, or at least veer some of the dollars away so that it's in a more liquid, easily accessible investment that won't be down, a year from now when you need the
won't
money.
Be fluctuating. It may not fluctuate up, but it's going to be there for when you need to write the check.
Exactly. So it's a little bit of a nuanced strategy as you get closer to college. And again, talk with your advisors about that. But it is something that I think people are becoming more and more aware of as these tuition checks are due and they go to look at their account statement. When they looked at it this time last year, it was humming along and there was no issues with the age-based approach. So that's a good approach until maybe age 16. And then we'd recommend reevaluating.
That's great.
Yeah.
So one of the things, this isn't 529 specific, but it's certainly related to the topic. I know one of the things we talk about when we're meeting with our clients who have education goals that they want to fund is how do you I know I've found oftentimes when clients are in, this might be the first time that as a couple, they're even sharing their views, their personal experience, and then how they want it to be the same or different for the next generation.
Absolutely. So thanks for bringing this up because, I talked a lot about like the once we've decided what we're going to do, right? How do you open an account?
What's the solution or the tool we want to use?
Exactly. But the first step really is, sitting down with a person or a couple or a family and talking about, what are your goals around education? And that can be, asking yourselves the questions about, did your parents pay for college? How important is it for you to pay for your kids' college? Do you care about paying for the full amount? Does that
do you
cover
want them to have skin in the game?
Exactly. Are you comfortable paying for in-state tuition, or are you comfortable sending your kids, to Harvard? Right. So when we talk to clients about education planning, it can mean a lot of different things. And so the first step is to understand what we're solving for, or try to get some consensus between a couple, even if they might have slightly different views of at least the starting point of what we're solving for. And then we can, help figure out what is a reasonable amount to try to save each year to meet those goals. But the reality is, when you have a young family and you've got multiple kids and college is very expensive, often what we're working with clients to do is to figure out how to balance the goals of education with also the goals of, funding retirement and, saving up to buy the house that's in the school district that you want to be in. And
just living life in general.
Exactly. So we recognize very much that this isn't everyone just throw 20 grand a year into your 529 and it'll all work out, because if it was just that easy, we probably wouldn't have as many clients. But it's an important topic for so many of our clients. But, it's also an approach that changes over time as your family dynamics change and as your income changes and your flexibility to help with things like education change. So
yeah, along with just, it's kind of hard to look at your 6-month-old baby and say, hey, little Susie here is going to Harvard all the way, right? You don't know what little Susie, what's she going to be good at? What's she going to be interested in? And
exactly. So yeah. It's, like all things, it's a balancing act. We certainly feel like this is a really good tool to solve for the goal of education funding, but it's, again, a process to really figure out what's the appropriate amount you want to contribute. Do you have other family members that are hoping to contribute? And
right,
you don't want, it would be a good problem to have, I guess. But if everyone put in the max each year, Susie would have too much money. And are there better ways to direct that? So, like all things, this is a conversation, and you need to kind of keep checking in on it and make sure that we're all moving at least towards this similar target. And
yeah, well, I like that you said too, it's, all of us have competing priorities, right? We all have usually more than one goal at one point in our life, and it's competing priorities. And just like we have a limit on the amount of time we have, generally speaking, there's going to be a limit on your income. You can only work so many hours or work so hard and things like that. But I really love how you shared that we use it. It's a piece of the financial puzzle, and we need to put all those pieces together when you're sitting down with your clients to say, where are you today? How do we put those pieces together and just keep you on the path of moving towards where you're trying to go?
Absolutely.
So one of the things that jogged my memory when you were talking is you talked about some qualified expenses and the flexibility. Can you, and you were pre-med originally. So let's say you didn't, come join our wonderful world of finance and you stayed on that path. Can you, let's just say maybe you got scholarships or there were funds left over after you're done with undergrad, can you use the funds for med school, law school?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So 529 funds can be used for, post-secondary education, whether it's a master's program, med school, you name it. So it's
okay.
I would say when we have this thing, clients ask us all different things. Does this qualify? Does this qualify? I would say 90% of the time, the things that, would qualify or you'd think might qualify do qualify. So as long as it's pursuing, education, and again, it doesn't need to be academia. It could be
a trade school.
Yeah, you could become a pastry chef. Exactly.
Yes, I love we both go to food.
Yeah. So it's very flexible. I'm trying to think of a good example of something that would not be covered.
I can think of one if you'd like a hand. So a common one I get, because so many kids go to school out of state, airfare to and from. And that is not a qualified expense.
Yep.
So
I was going to say a car, like if a kid needs a car at school, that doesn't count.
Right. So that's a common one we get. But I know like if they need a computer or lab fees or things like that, anything that's required with their degree or major.
Correct.
Yeah. Could you, and I know we'll keep this high level because I know you and I are often saying like, it depends, or let's call your tax advisor, because things really are dependent on your individual situation. And as you mentioned, what state do you live in? But there was a change in the law recently regarding you can use funds for private K through 12. So before college expenses.
Yes. So that was a change in the last, I think, 5 or 6 years, that in addition to college and trade school, post-secondary education expenses, you could also use $529 for kindergarten through 12th grade. There is a limit on how much you can use a year. So it's currently $10,000.
Okay. So
it's not as flexible as college, expenses would be, or other post-secondary education. And then it was a federal rule that was changed that allowed for this. And then each state had to also go through it and adopt it and create their own kind of specific rules around it. So that's why, to your point, we won't go into all the details on the state level. But as we mentioned earlier, 529s do have some different rules at the state level, and this is another one of those. So talk to your advisor. It's certainly an option in most states to use $529 for, K through 12th private
education expenses. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think we've covered a lot of the topics or the things that you talk to clients with when they're planning for education. Is there anything you wanted to either share with our audience or make sure that we covered on this very important topic?
No, I think we talked about it earlier, but, stay the course. Even if the 529 accounts are down, just be aware of your strategy and, make sure you understand what your strategy is. If you don't understand your strategy, talk to an advisor, because our goal with clients, especially during more turbulent markets, is just to feel really comfortable that they know what the long-term plan is. And education planning is certainly, a longer-term planning item. So
it absolutely is. I want to thank you for your time and sharing your wisdom and knowledge with all of our listeners. I have to say, every time we're talking about this, I am always grateful that this is not a goal on my plate, but who knows, friends, kids and stuff may benefit from it. Before we wrap up, there's a question I ask all of my guests, and it is, if you could live anywhere, in, like no time constraints, no money, doesn't matter, work, things like that, where would you live and why?
I think I would say I would move to London. It's kind of a practical answer, I guess, in that
you speak the language.
I speak the language. My husband he has British citizenship, so that would be this is possible. And then
love it.
We love to travel, and I would love to be able to access the diverse places all over Europe to within a quicker flight. So
yeah, that would be much easier for much more fun weekend getaways.
Exactly.
Right?
I know we're still at the age of attempting like 4-day weekends in Europe, but it's getting
you have more energy than me, friend.
It's dwindling. So I don't know how many more we have of those left in us, but yeah, I would say London. And I studied abroad in London, so holds a special place in my heart.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for sharing. We appreciate that. Well, great. Well, again, to our audience, if you have any, want to have an additional conversation or talk about your specific situation, or connect with Colleen or I to talk about anything from your financial planning needs, please feel free to reach out to us. You can call at 312-831-4370. And Sue or Lorena can connect you with one of us. Or if you go to our website, at www.myprivatevista.com. And in the upper right-hand corner, there's a contact us button. And again, you can reference this podcast and we'll get you in touch with Colleen to continue the conversation.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Colleen and Nicole, this has been fantastic. Colleen, thank you so much for coming on the show. 529 plans, it's a big, big deal. Nicole, I think you and I need to talk off air about the 625 plan. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but you mentioned that you wouldn't mind giving $100,000 to a friend's child or friend's grandchild. And I did the math on that $16,000 rule, and it takes 6.25 years. So that's the 625 plan now. I'm just going to introduce that to you in the audience. We'll talk later about that. Anywho, thank you so much for facilitating this show. It was fantastic. And of course, our last thank you is for you, listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Dollars and Cents podcast with Nicole Romito. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Nicole comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. And we humbly ask that you share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review, as this actually helps others find the show. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at Private Vista, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Dollars and Cents, Creating Your Fulfilled Life with Nicole Romito, sponsored by Private Vista. Visit our website at www.myprivatevista.com or give us a call at 312-831-4370. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Private Vista is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. This is not an offer to buy or sell securities. No investment process is free of risk, and there is no guarantee that the investment process or the investment opportunities referenced herein will be profitable. Past performance is neither indicative nor a guarantee of future results. The investment opportunities referenced herein may not be suitable for all investors. All data or other information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Any opinions, news, research, analyses, prices, or other data or information contained in this presentation is provided as general market commentary and does not constitute investment advice. Private Vista and Hightower Advisors, LLC, or any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties expressed or implied as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or errors or omissions, or results obtained from the use of this information. Private Vista and Hightower Advisors, LLC assume no liability for action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to this information. The information is provided as of the date referenced. Such data and other information are subject to changes without notice. This was created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors, LLC, or any of its affiliates.